The roar of the engines came first, deep, guttural, and unrelenting. It started as a distant hum, then grew into a tremor that shook the windows of the roadside diner. Forks paused mid-air, conversations died off, and every eye turned toward the glass wall facing the parking lot. Out there, under the late afternoon sun, a line of motorcycles rolled in like an armored wave, chrome glinting, black jackets rippling in the wind, exhaust fumes curling into the air. Inside, the waitress, a blonde woman named Kathy, muttered, "Oh no, not them again." She glanced toward the booth by the window, where a lone woman sat, dark-skinned, confident, reading a book while absent-mindedly dipping a fork into her pancakes. Tamara hadn't looked up once. She sat with perfect composure, her back straight, her jacket hanging neatly on the chair beside her. A cup of coffee steamed next to her plate. She had been on the road for 3 days now, a solo trip she'd promised herself for years. The diner was a random stop, a place to stretch her legs, eat something that wasn't from a gas station, and maybe listen to the hum of ordinary life. Then came the engines. The door swung open with a violent jingle, and a blast of cold air rushed inside. 7 bikers walked in, boots thudding against the tiled floor, laughter booming like thunder. They were loud, not just in sound, but in presence. Grease-stained jeans, vests covered in patches, sunglasses still on inside. They took over the room with the ease of men who expected no one to stop them. Tamara turned a page. The leader, a tall man with tattoos that snaked from his jawline down to his collarbone, scanned the diner like he owned it. His name, according to the patch on his vest, was Mace. He grinned when he spotted Tamara. A woman alone, quiet, not even glancing their way. Easy target, he thought. "Hey sweetheart," he called across the room, his voice low but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. "You lost or something?" Tamara didn't answer. She sliced a piece of pancake, brought it to her lips, and continued reading. The laughter behind him rose. "Guess she's shy," another biker said, sliding into the booth directly behind her. "You from around here, baby?" The waitress tried to intervene. "Come on, fellas, she's just..." "Relax, Kathy," Mace said, waving a hand without looking. "We're just talking." He walked over, the heavy chain at his belt clinking with each step, and leaned on the edge of Tamara's table. "That a good book?" he asked. Finally, she looked up. Her eyes, dark, steady, unbothered, met his. "It was," she said simply. For a moment, Mace was caught off guard. There was no tremor in her voice, no fear. She spoke as if he were just another stranger interrupting her lunch. He smiled wider, leaning in closer. "You know, a lady like you shouldn't be eating here alone. These roads get rough." Tamara put her fork down. "So I've noticed." Her tone wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't hostile either. It was quiet, even polite, and somehow that made it worse. The men behind him laughed again, but it sounded a little forced now, uncertain. Mace tilted his head, studying her. "You got some attitude." "Not really," she said. "Just trying to eat in peace." That last word, peace, landed heavier than she intended. The diner was silent again. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter and the ticking of the wall clock above the door. Kathy stood frozen with the coffee pot in her hand, watching like someone watching a lit fuse burn. Mace straightened, his smirk returning. "Tell you what, sweetheart. Why don't you let me buy your meal? Call it a welcome to our town." Tamara's gaze didn't waver. "You don't own this town." That did it. The line between amusement and challenge had been crossed. A few of the bikers shifted in their seats, waiting for what would happen next. He laughed, but the sound had no humor. "You've got some nerve." Tamara picked up her coffee, took a slow sip, and said, "So do you. For talking to strangers like they owe you attention." The air grew heavier, charged. Mace tapped his knuckles on her table once, hard enough to make her cup rattle. "Careful, lady," he said softly. Tamara looked down at the trembling coffee, then back up at him. "Always am." And just like that, the moment froze, Mace trying to decide if this was worth it, Tamara waiting calmly, unreadable. Behind the counter, Kathy's hand hovered near the phone. Outside, the engines still ticked as they cooled. Tamara's reflection stared back at her from the window, steady, composed, ready. No one knew it yet, but the wrong people had just picked the wrong woman to mess with. Mace's knuckles lingered on the edge of Tamara's table, the sound of that single, heavy tap still echoing in the air. For a few heartbeats, nobody moved. The diner had gone completely silent, the kind of silence that trembles on the edge of violence. Kathy, the waitress, froze behind the counter, her hand halfway to the phone. An elderly couple near the window huddled closer together, pretending to study the menu. The cook peeked out from the kitchen door, eyes wide and worried. Tamara broke the silence first. She reached for her coffee cup again, steady as a surgeon. Her hand didn't shake. She took a small sip, her gaze still on Mace. Then, she set the cup down with a soft click. "You done?" she asked. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried, smooth and calm, slicing through the tension like a blade through paper. The question hung there. Mace straightened up, his grin twisting into something meaner. "Lady," he said, flexing his wrist, "you really don't know who you're talking to." Tamara raised one eyebrow. "You're the guy blocking the light." "That's all I need to know." A few of the bikers laughed under their breath, not because it was funny, but because they didn't know what else to do. Mace's jaw tightened. He reached for her plate, maybe to shove it aside, maybe to make a point, but he never got that far. Tamara's hand shot out so fast that the movement barely registered. In one precise motion, she caught his wrist, twisted it counterclockwise, and pulled. The sound was sharp, a joint popping under sudden pressure. Mace let out a startled grunt, his body dropping instinctively to his knees to relieve the pain. "Don't move," Tamara said quietly, still holding his wrist in a lock that kept him immobilized. Her grip was firm but surgical, no wasted energy, no anger. "You don't want to make me finish this." The other bikers jumped up, chairs scraping the floor, boots pounding against the tiles. One of them, a heavy-set man with a scar across his cheek, stepped forward, fists clenched. "Let him go, lady." Tamara didn't even glance his way. "He can leave when he remembers his manners." Her tone wasn't mocking. It was even, measured, professional, the voice of someone who had been trained to handle worse situations than this one. Mace tried to yank his arm free, but every move only deepened the hold. Pain shot up his elbow, forcing a hiss through his teeth. "Say you're done," Tamara said. He glared up at her, jaw trembling from the pressure. You're crazy." "Maybe," she said, "or maybe you just made a bad decision." Then, as if she'd decided the point was made, she released him. Mace stumbled back, clutching his wrist, eyes burning with fury and confusion. He wasn't used to being handled, especially not by someone who barely seemed to try. The biker with the scar lunged. He didn't get halfway before Tamara pivoted, her body turning in a smooth arc. One foot hooked his leg, the other drove into his chest, controlled, efficient. The man crashed into a table with a thud that shook the ketchup bottles. Gasps rippled through the diner. The elderly couple had long since fled toward the door. Kathy dropped the coffee pot, glass shattering across the floor. Now the rest of the crew hesitated. They weren't looking at a woman anymore, not in the way they had when they first came in. They were looking at something they didn't understand, someone trained, someone dangerous. Tamara exhaled slowly, straightening her sleeves. "You all done?" she asked again, calm as ever. The biker still on the ground groaned. Mace rubbed his wrist, glancing at his crew. "She's not worth it," one of them muttered, but his voice carried a tremor that said what they were all thinking. She could break us if she wanted to. Mace's pride burned behind his eyes, but the pain in his wrist was a sharp reminder of reality. He spat to the side, glaring at Tamara. "You just made yourself a real bad enemy, lady." Tamara met his stare without flinching. "Then be smarter next time. Don't start what you can't finish." He opened his mouth, maybe to spit another threat, but something in her eyes stopped him, that calm, soldier's stare that saw right through him. It wasn't rage or bravado. It was control, the kind that came from years of discipline, of facing people far more dangerous than a few drunk bikers on a Sunday afternoon. The room stayed still. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the diner's sign, the sound cutting through the tension like static. Finally, Mace lifted his chin toward the door. "Let's roll out." The others hesitated a second too long, then followed, shoving past tables and muttering curses under their breath. The bell above the door jingled as the last one left, and the roar of engines came alive again outside. When the noise faded, Tamara sighed and picked up her napkin, wiping a drop of coffee from the table as if nothing had happened. Kathy stood frozen, eyes wide. "Who are you?" she whispered. Tamara looked up, her calm returning like a tide. "Just someone trying to eat breakfast," she said, standing and tossing a few bills onto the table. Then she grabbed her jacket, slung it over her shoulder, and walked out, leaving behind a diner full of stunned silence and the faint scent of burnt coffee. The engines faded down the highway, leaving behind an echo of chaos that clung to the diner like smoke. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the soft dripping of coffee from the shattered pot behind the counter. Kathy stood frozen, staring at the door where the bikers had vanished, her mouth slightly open as if words had abandoned her. Tamara exhaled slowly, the tension rolling off her shoulders like a weight she'd carried before. She adjusted her jacket, looked around at the overturned chairs, and sighed. "Sorry about the mess," she said, her tone casual, almost apologetic. Kathy blinked. "Mess? Honey, you just threw one of them across the room." Tamara's lips curved into a faint smile. He shouldn't have stood so close. The cook peeked out again from behind the kitchen door, a large man with a spatula still in hand. "You some kind of cop?" he asked cautiously. "Used to be," Tamara replied. She picked up her coffee cup, now half spilled and cold, and took a last sip anyway. "Now I'm just trying to enjoy breakfast without getting interrupted." Kathy let out a nervous laugh, one hand pressed to her chest. "Well, you sure showed them. I thought they were gonna tear this place apart. That Mace fella, he's bad news." Tamara nodded absently, her eyes drifting toward the window. Outside, dust still hung in the air, glowing in the afternoon sunlight. "Bad news usually finds its way to loud places," she murmured. She turned back to Kathy and reached into her pocket, pulling out a few bills. "For the food," she said, placing them neatly on the table. "And the coffee pot." Kathy shook her head. "No, ma'am, you don't owe me a thing. If anything, I should be paying you for keeping them from wrecking the place." Tamara chuckled softly. "Then we'll call it even." She set the money down anyway, grabbed her jacket, and slipped one arm through the sleeve. As she walked toward the door, the small bell above it jingled, soft, almost cheerful, as if mocking what had just happened. Before she stepped out, Kathy called after her, "Hey, what should I tell folks if those bikers come asking who you were?" Tamara paused, glancing over her shoulder. The sunlight framed her face, catching the edge of her calm smile. "Tell them I was nobody special," she said. "Just someone who doesn't like bullies." Then she pushed the door open and walked outside. The air was crisp and smelled faintly of rain, though the sky was still clear. Her reflection glanced back at her from the diner's window, calm, composed, but with that same flicker in her eyes she saw every time she thought about her past. There was a time when she'd worn a uniform, when her hands had been trained to end fights before they began. Old habits die hard. She walked across the parking lot toward her car, a dusty black sedan that had seen better days. The paint was chipped, one mirror cracked, but it ran, and that was all she needed. She was halfway to the driver's door when a familiar rumble made her freeze. Engines. She turned. But this time, it wasn't Mesa's gang. A single motorcycle coasted into the lot, its rider slowing to a stop. The man pulled off his helmet, revealing a lined face and kind eyes. He was one of the few regulars in town who wasn't afraid of the biker crew, an old local named Roy, who ran a small garage up the road. "Tamara, right," he said, swinging his leg off the bike. "Heard there was some trouble." She raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Roy chuckled. "Small town. Sound carries." He looked toward the diner. "You handled them." "They handled themselves," she said dryly. Roy studied her for a moment, then nodded approvingly. "Guess they picked the wrong lady to mess with." She smiled faintly at that. "Seems like that's the story of my life." Roy kicked the dirt near his boot. "You might have just bought yourself some quiet. Those boys don't like losing face, but they ain't stupid either. You hurt their pride, not their bones." "That's all I meant to," Tamara said. "Violence is only useful when it ends things, not starts them." He tilted his head. "You sound like someone who's had to learn that the hard way." She didn't answer. Instead, She looked down the stretch of highway leading west, endless, open, and calling. Roy nodded, as if reading her thoughts. You heading out again? Always, she said. Can't stay still too long. Trouble follows stillness. He grinned. Well, safe travels then. And if you ever pass back through, coffee's on me. Tamara's smile softened. I'll hold you to that. She got into her car, the leather seat creaking beneath her. As the engine came to life, she glanced once more at the diner in the rearview mirror. Kathy was standing by the window, waving faintly, a mix of gratitude and awe in her eyes. Tamara gave a small nod, then pulled onto the road. The sun dipped low, setting the horizon ablaze with gold and amber. The wind rushed through her open window, carrying away the last traces of tension. Behind her, the diner would soon return to its quiet rhythm, coffee brewing. Conversations humming, laughter tentative but alive. Ahead of her stretched miles of road, the kind of road that promised freedom, danger, and stories waiting to be written. Tamara drove on, her fingers tapping lightly against the wheel, a ghost of a smile on her lips. Somewhere between the steady hum of the tires and the whisper of the wind, she murmured to herself, they really did mess with the wrong woman.